Welcome to Naruto, my name is Veronica, and today, as you can see, I am packing my bag because I'm going on a trip, so why not discuss traveling, specifically within the setting of fantasy. In contemporary, you don't necessarily have that much of an issue because you can always use Google Maps or something in order to figure out how long time it takes from A to point B, you know? That's what I do in Hellbound. That is semi-contemporary. It's kind of like a mirror world, and it has slight differences to our real world, but on average it's kind of similar. So just now I wrote chapter 12 is when they reach the vampires, which is according to Google, from where they started their trip to where they ended it is about a almost 17-hour trip. So I could just put that in, I could space it out and look fairly logical without mentioning exactly how long time it would take them to get there. Being more general in how you describe the passage of time can give you the opportunity to spend more time in certain areas. Like if you want to include a specific scene that if you were specific about time, the reader would go, you don't have time to travel that distance and do this thing. So being a bit more general gives you more of a control over the flow of time, essentially. I think I have too many socks. What? Well, it's gonna rain, so I might as well have an extra pair just in case. Bottom line is that the advice I have for you is to not be specific about time. Have a sense of how long you think that it should take from point A to point B and all of that stuff, but being too specific might cause the readers to kind of like, that doesn't make sense, because from that point to that point that you mentioned earlier in the story, you said X amount of time, and those are further away from what you are describing here, but you're saying it takes about the same or more time. You know, it causes these kind of contingency issues that you need to keep an eye on, and I highly recommend that you minimize contingency issues that you need to keep an eye on, because it gives you a headache. Trust me, I know. There are different ways to handle it. You can cut out time entirely and just say, hey, they got there, and then they got there, and then they moved there, whatever. I personally don't like when it's too detached from time passing, but I prefer using more terms like they arrived in the late evening, or the sun had started to set, or the sun was rising when they arrived. You know, when it is an indication of time, but not necessarily a specific amount of time that has passed already. So that's how I try to approach it, as opposed to being super specific. Another way to deal with it is to make it more reliant on the character you're following and their perception. Think about yourself when you are stressed, when you're focused on something else, when you're having fun, etc. You don't pay attention to the passage of time. You are just existing, or you're focused and you're like just get things done kind of mode. You're not necessarily paying too much attention to how much time has passed. And you can do that with the characters as well, playing around a little bit more with how, like, would the character pay attention to how much time has passed in this type of situation? Then you also highlight, oh, it took them half a day to get there, or do this thing, or whatever. Or if they are not paying attention so much, maybe they're having a lot of fun, or they're super stressed and they're just like running away from something, then they wouldn't pay attention to like, oh, it took us 4 hours to get there. That's a great, like, we did great time kind of thing. It would be more like, and we got there, we did this, and we climbed in, we put more, like, we started a fire, blah, blah, blah. Situate the characters, of course, but you could very much make it based on what type of character you're following. If they are paying attention to something, then you bring it up. If they're not, then you kind of leave it pretty obscure. That's kind of what I did in Sword of Dalcor, where you follow Alexa throughout the book, and then there's 1 or 2 paragraphs where you see the world from Anish's perspective. because he is an assassin and he is very skilled in warfare and fighting and all of that stuff. So he has more knowledge, and it was very impactful to put that paragraph in there, because to Alexa, who is more of an academic, she's not necessarily aware of the strategies or the patterns that she was watching in this war camp. So cutting off to Anish just for two paragraphs to give his perspective helped a lot. But that was really the moment that I realized that really, and I went back and edited the whole book with this in mind, was that really, what would Alexa, the main character that you're following, pay attention to? And I felt like that made the book a lot more interesting. It made it much more true to her, because it was certain things that I had included that I would pay attention to, but when I just reread it again and noticed that, hey, Alexa wouldn't care about this stuff, so therefore I either toned it down so it was fairly like background noise, or I just removed it completely. And that is something that you do with this. You can do with time, passing of time as well, where you ask yourself, is the character in a position where they would be paying attention, or do they even care? Maybe you have a airhead character that literally do not care about pretty much anything. Why would they care about passage of time? Of course, you have one of my favorite books that is it's by Mitch Albom, The Timekeeper, where the passage of time is the central concept. Highly recommend reading that book. It's one of my favorites. It's not even technically fantasy, but it's kind of fantasy because you're dealing with time travel, but like in a more academic sense of exploring and all of that stuff. So technically it is a bit fantasy in there. Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna class it fantasy. But I highly recommend reading that book. If time is of a central concept or importance to your story, of course, talking about time and the passage of time, that is important. This advice is not for that. And I think that you could work a lot with amping up the tension by like, okay, we have short amount of time to do this kind of stuff, and then ticking clock kind of vibe. Then of course the advice I'm giving here does not apply, because then the passage of time is an important concept in your story. But in general with fantasy, the passage of time is not the most important part. It is just something that happens. You know, you have your training montage that skips over what should be probably 6 months to a year, but because everyone in fantasy is so special, it's more like 2 weeks. You know, you gloss over this kind of thing. And that's fine. Like, I do that too, because the training montages aren't necessarily the most interesting to follow in detail. But I do highly recommend that you don't spend too much focus on actual passage of time in order to make it easier for yourself, first and foremost, easier to maintain suspension of disbelief for readers, and also just contingency, like not messing up one detail here and there. So basically, yeah, make it easier for yourself and don't spend too much time focusing on time. How many times am I saying times in this video? Okay, we got the first load of stuff into the bag. Tech is everywhere, charging and bringing so much tech. Yay. Okay, hair's delivering. Hi. Actually, I just realized that I don't have anything additional to say. I think I said my piece, so I'm not gonna drag this out just to make a longer video. But with that said, drop down below what your thoughts on the subject is, and if you have any good recommendations that deals with this in a nice way. Otherwise, follow me on Instagram if you want to see where I'm going and how my trip goes. Otherwise, I hope that you have a good night, day, wherever you're in the time stream, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!